Today on 1% Better.
I do say this frequently. I'm a very lucky man, but a special guest today coming to 1% Better. I know we're teed up for a damn good conversation when Gair Maxwell comes to town. Gair, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a thrill to be here, Joe. Been looking forward to it for a long time, to be with America's podcasting coach and to have a damn good conversation. Have I ever told you? Well, maybe I've told you like half a dozen or a dozen times. I just love that idea. I think people are craving damn good conversations.
You've told me in so many ways in different forms, and we're going to get to all that. 200 plus episodes. I don't know that I've ever asked this very basic question, but I know you'll have an interesting answer for me. So let's open with this. Gair, what is it that you do?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. What I do is I study the origin of legends and decode their enduring appeal. And I take that deeper understanding that dates back for centuries, and I help small to medium sized businesses create what we call irresistible, maybe even sometimes legendary brands. So, Big Little Legends, the book that's going to really, I think, create a dent in the universe, is a metaphor for small to medium sized companies, organizations, municipalities that have created irresistible brands, but we're using as a foundational piece, Joe, my love of history. I am a history buff, and just understanding how legends are created in the first place.
You can't help everybody. What made you choose that group?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. You can't help everybody.
Yeah, you can't help every size business. You can't help every entrepreneur. You can't help every group, every population, I mean every demographic. Why did you choose the small to medium sized business people?
Okay, now I understand the question. So what happened was a few years ago, it was at a Tech Canada meeting, and a member came up to me and said, every time the subject, and I've been called a branding expert or a specialist or a strategist for many, many years now, and I'm invited to speak all over the continent, different parts of Europe, and now into Asia, but this one particular time, gentleman says, every time this subject comes up, whether it's branding or marketing, everyone's coming in and talking about Apple or Starbucks or Coca-Cola, Disney, Harley Davidson. He says, the problem is a lot of us in that small to medium sized category, and let me clarify that $10 million a year in annual revenue to about $300 or $500 million a year. Like, they're substantial sized businesses, but they're not these Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 conglomerates. And the gentleman said, he says, we don't relate. We don't have the resources. We don't feel we have the dollars or the budgets. And that's the epiphany that I needed to create Big Little Legends. I didn't have the title or anything like that, Joe, but it was the culmination of over 2 decades of firsthand experience and research that says, well, why can't a small to medium sized organization or company have the pulling magnetic power and the allure of some of the greatest brands in the world, like Ferrari, Lululemon, Nike, et cetera, et cetera? Why not? And then that just opened a floodgate of research opportunities to really study a lot of these Big Little Legends up close and decode their common denominators. What were the common characteristics? Establish the criteria, and then work backwards to create a methodology and a working theory that technically anyone with enough courage, initiative, and vision could apply. And that's what I'm really interested in, Joe, is you said, with respect to your question, you can't help everybody. Well, not to be fair, not everybody has courage, initiative, and vision. But if you do, then this is the kind of material, this is the kind of philosophy that I think really resonates with those who just don't want to settle for status quo or being ordinary.
If listeners head over to gairmaxwell.com, they'll see We help leaders like you build irresistible brands. So what I'm hearing is you heard that they didn't have the marketing dollars, the resources, but you saw another way. What did you swap in and equip them with instead of marketing and dollars?
That's a fabulous question. In fact, no one has ever asked me that before because, again, working backwards, Joe, when you understand the origin of legends, you'll know for a fact money never created a legend, it was never dollars and cents in the first place. So, whether it's the legend of George Washington and chopping down the cherry tree, whether it was the legend of, let's say, uh, uh, King Arthur or Robin Hood, it wasn't big marketing dollars that created those legends, and those legends still endure to this day. And some people will say, well, wait a second, that's a real stretch. Well, is it? Joe, let's do this for real with your audience with a chapter right out of the book that illustrates the universal principle. How about that?
Beautiful.
What is the most famous painting in the world?
It's so famous. I just asked my kids about the size of it. And I think this will fit beautifully right into your narrative, which is it's physically much smaller than people realize, the Mona Lisa.
Right, right. And so, if we use the Mona Lisa as a baseline for understanding the deeper elements of your question, Joe, we can really take our audience a long way today. So, the Mona Lisa, prior to a singular event, was not the most famous painting in the world. In fact, I remember, I'll never forget speaking at a large industry conference in Las Vegas and being on stage, and there was like 500 or so people in the audience. And from the stage, I shout out, well, what is the most famous painting in the world? And I'm sure 499 out of 500 came back with the Mona Lisa. My point is that out of all the paintings in the world, only one commands unbelievable top of mind awareness. My question, and this is chapter 1 of the book, why? What made the Mona Lisa this top of mind monster in that particular product service category called paintings? Because when you dig into the story, you'll find out that in the 1800s, first of all, the Mona Lisa dates back to the 16th century with Leonardo da Vinci. But even through the 1800s, it was not this slam dunk top of mind favorite. It wasn't. It never was until the events of August 21st, 1911. August 21st, 1911, the Mona Lisa is stolen. It was an inside job. An Italian handyman, Vincenzo Perugia, walks out in broad daylight with the very smallish, as you mentioned, Mona Lisa tucked under his smock. He's gone for 2 years. In fact, here's how not famous the Mona Lisa was. It took the officials at the Louvre about 30 to 48 hours, give or take, to even notice that she was missing. And what happened? Well, once the authorities were notified, this hit the press. So forget this great podcast that you and I are on, and forget social media. What was Google? What was Facebook? What was YouTube all rolled up into one? In 1911, it was the newspaper. And the front pages of newspapers from Paris to Pittsburgh to Pewaukee, Wisconsin, and Pensacola, Florida, were plastered with front page photographs of the Mona Lisa. Now, the painting is famous. For a 2-year news cycle. Oh, by the way, Joe, there were conspiracy theories back in 1911. Who done it? The chief of police was forced to resign in disgrace. It was a national scandal. It was an insult to France that the Mona Lisa had been trifled with. A 2-year news cycle, Joe, worth millions and millions and millions of dollars of free publicity that no painting ever got before or since. And when she was finally recovered back in her native Italy in Florence, Perugia tried to sell it off to an art dealer, and that's how the case was solved. Then she's brought back to Paris, where 120,000 people are waiting like a mob to welcome her back home. And again, more press coverage. So, if anyone in our audience today has ever been to the Louvre and you've ever wondered why, you see, the Louvre, and I explain this in the book, Joe, it's the perfect metaphor for any market that is crowded and where so many players are competing for attention. So think of accountants, lawyers, mechanics. Think of every firm under the sun, car dealerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, at the Louvre, there's 35,000 paintings and artifacts competing for audience attention. When you wander through the galleries, most are empty. There's magnificent works of art, all world class, all being ignored. Only one has the mob. You know, it's right out of Black Sabbath when Ronnie James Dio replaced Ozzy as the lead singer. The mob rules at the Louvre. More than 10 million people a year go to that museum for one painting. And so, what do we learn from that? We learn that, how do I say this? Art without a story is just paint on a canvas. A business without a story, just like any other business. So to further validate and answer your question, money, budgets, marketing dollars are meaningless unless you actually have a story to work with. There's got to be some form of drama, whether it's comedic, whether it's, in this case, filled with mystery and intrigue. There's got to be something where heroes and villains and all kinds of things that relate to storytelling are part and parcel of the package. Otherwise, it's just marketing.
Love to hear it. Your pronunciation of that museum validated my choice to pour myself a cognac before we started. I have not taken a sip. I'm doing this sober, but this will be my celebratory cognac when you pronounce it like that. I also should tell listeners, I lit a candle today. I can't show it. We don't have the technology to swipe the camera, but that's what the mood that I'm in when I talk to you. So I want to appreciate that. There's a few lessons to tease out of that. Now I want to know what the lesson is about quality in that story you just told, because now I'm hearing critics say, hey, well, that's a lot of showbiz. That's a lot of
Right.
all show and no go, as they would say.
Right.
And I'm actually left wondering, even though Da Vinci painted it, I'm wondering about the empirical quality of the Mona Lisa. And it just seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that would not have been enough. The actual quality of the painting would not have been enough. What is the
No.
lesson for business owners to tease out from that as it regards to quality?
Yeah, that's a great question. Quality, table stakes. Is quality necessary? Yes. But it's like the number of realtors in Toronto or the number of lawyers in Chicago. There's 48,000 realtors in Toronto, Ontario, 2 hours down the road from me. In Chicago, in Cook County, Illinois, Joe, there's 45,210. Okay, lawyers, practicing attorneys. My point, they're all good or claim or make that claim. And quality is not a differentiator in the world of brand building. If you want to create a long-term brand, don't focus on better, focus on different.
Wait, I
And
got to
the
stop you
Mona
there.
Lisa,
The quality is not a brand differentiator. That is powerful. Tell me more.
well, it's not, because quality is an assumption. It's like the car business. How many automotive manufacturers are out there? And they're all doing the same thing in their marketing, basically extolling the virtues of their products and their right. And it's so products, services, expertise. The assumption of quality is a given, which means strategically that's not an alley. That's a dark alley you're going down. You'll never see the light at the end of that tunnel. That's just not going to happen. And as you can tell, Theodore and Sophie and Maggie are agreeing with me at this instant, because they know from experience, Joe, that quality just gets you into the game. Now, let me say this. Is quality necessary? Yes. Can you put lipstick on a pig? No. The Mona Lisa had to have been a good painting. It had to have been of some quality just to get into the Louvre. But I'm going to argue, how many world-class paintings are at the Louvre? They're all world-class, meaning you can be world-class or very, very, very good at what you do or what you sell or what you offer and still be ignored. Because when all things are equal, and even when they're not, he who has the best story is going to win. We have seen that over and over and over again in our research. And what gives Big Little Legends its depth is we have so many firsthand examples of where this theory has been successfully applied in some of the most overcrowded, overly competitive markets known to man. But the final thought, if you will, I mean, if you want to keep exploring it, great. But the thing I have to throw in is what happens on that fateful day, August 21st, if Vincenzo Peruggia walks out with another painting, not the Mona Lisa. What happens then? Which painting do you think you and I are talking about on this podcast to this very day?
That's fascinating. Fascinating take. In fact, you close the prologue with a little excerpt that I want to read for people, and you say, "Warning: if you choose to keep reading and plunge into the murky, bottomless waters of what makes an iconic brand come to life, there is a chance you may never swim back to safer shores." It was the word "safer" that drew me, because I thought about people who are reading this book. They're going to get into the nooks and crannies of building an irresistible brand, but you don't promise them safety.
Absolutely not, because legends have never played it safe. You don't achieve legendary status in business and life and your career by playing it safe and doing what everybody else does and follow, the 7 easy steps and all the cookie cutter approaches that are out there on the internet. And thank God for the internet that way, Joe. There's lots of that out there for those who want to pursue that. But for those who want to create something a little more personal, a little more authentic, a little more meaningful, that came from within, that only you can own, that's what Big Little Legends is all about, which is really metaphorically and literally, can you step into your own story? Now, the Mona Lisa is a great universal example, but in the book, we have many examples. And just like the Mona Lisa, as you sip that fine cognac and make me jealous, Joe, August 21st, 1911, we have pinpointed the exact date of when the world shifted and how circumstances created the Big Little Legend. But in every case, it never happens without some story of significance. And so the point, I guess, to wrap it all up this way, either a story happens to you, like that's what happened to the Mona Lisa. It also happened to a guy selling soup in Midtown Manhattan back in November of 1995. Joe, his soup was good. It was very good soup. It was delicious soup. But the lineups for his soup never, appeared until when? November of 1995. And you can probably guess who I'm talking about.
One of my students loves Seinfeld more than anything in the world.
Right. So my point is the soup Nazi has what his brand building days were done with one episode of Seinfeld. And so a story either happens to you like a bolt of lightning right out of the blue, or as a leader, you've got to go out and actually make one happen. Either way. And we call it in the book strategic drama. And strategic drama is something that the leader, the CEO, and the leadership team understands that we have to take responsibility and be accountable for discovering, telling, and living our own story. Otherwise, we're going to go into the mosh pit. We're going to swim in the sea of similarity around products, services, features, advantages, benefits. We're going to compete on price and, heaven help me, the unique selling proposition. which I've never seen a real life human ever sit down at a coffee shop ever and say things like, "Joe, did you hear about XYZ company? I hear they have a fantastic USP." And that has never happened because for too long, in my view, Joe, business leaders have been drinking some very dangerous Kool-Aid, which basically forces them to be like everybody else. That's why all the LinkedIn profiles are basically the same. And all companies promise unwavering commitment to customer satisfaction, and they're all doing the same CRM things. They're all trying to get us to fill in the little surveys to give us data. So in this headlong rush to accumulate more and more data, what they're forgetting is long-term brand building starts with the soul.
Mm.
And can your organization communicate the soul of your company through the telling of a story?
In any damn good conversation, I always envision a decision tree right in front of me. I can go this way or I can go that way. That's courtesy of my guest today, Gair Maxwell. I'm going to choose this direction. Talk about differentiation. Talk about not doing things that other people do. Let's do a quick checklist here to get people up to speed on what you do not do. Yes or no on this list, Gair.
Sure.
Active on Twitter.
You're asking if I'm
Yes.
active on Twitter?
Yes. Are you
Oh,
pounding away at the keys on Twitter?
no. No.
SEO.
Do I have a presence? Yes. Am
Yeah.
I highly active? No.
SEO study, going deep into the weeds of SEO analytics.
No.
Um, sending newsletters every day.
No.
Um, going into complex metrics to how to acquire a
No.
customer.
No. 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 And no.
See, people just met you right there. And it's interesting that you made deliberate choices not to do that, while 75%, I'll make up a number, of people listening have been drilled into their head. Those are the 5 things they have to do.
Right. And I sit back and I go, well, how has marketing been taught? Let's put this under the broad umbrella of marketing. And I look at it, Joe, and say, well, how has marketing been taught for the last 60, 70, 80 years at business schools all over the planet? And if you study the core, like, I'm a history buff. I'm a real history nerd, if you will. And so when I started to dig into it, I realized fundamentally what's still being taught are variations of the 4 Ps. So I went back and dug into the Harvard guy that actually introduced the 4 Ps way back when. And so what I arrive at is when I look at curriculum offered at major universities, I see that academic language, it does have its purpose. Please, I'm not saying it doesn't. However, to create something irresistible and legendary in the mind of the market, to create an icon, I don't know that case studies and empirical analysis and white papers are really going to cut the mustard here. I mean, I think that high level MBA language is perfect for data focused market research. Okay. It's perfect for conjoint analysis, behavioral economics, Bayesian statistics, and in commercial markets using evolutionary game theory. But how do you explain what we call the Mona Lisa effect? And why does that same Mona Lisa effect happen at a New Orleans coffee shop, at a Seattle fish market, and in northern Ontario, 90 minutes north of Toronto, 5 miles past Orillia, word of mouth heaven on Highway 11, where Weber's has long lineups since the late 1960s for burgers, shakes, and fries? All of what we talk about in Big Little Legends defies logic.
Speaking of logic and mysticism, gorgeous book cover over your right shoulder. Well
Oh,
done.
thank you.
That was
Thank
not an
you.
accident. That was, I'm going to go ahead and say that was strategic drama.
Yeah, well, thank you for noticing, Joe. And actually, people have been pointing out as we kind of soft. We there's a real story actually behind the cover. If you care to hear the story behind the cover, is we found out the hard way that our initial thought was far too logical, and we had to go to the metaphorical.
Mm.
And let me explain. I always, when I speak to business groups or any audiences, and I was just speaking to another one this morning, um, I always illustrate how in this discipline of creating a legendary brand, it helps to understand that the language of brand is metaphorical, meaningful, emotional, symbolic. It's rich with symbolism, rituals. However, the language of business is what? Logical, linear, analytical, mathematical, mechanical, factual, rational. Two completely different languages. And what happened with our book cover, we actually tried to take a logical approach and probably invested 4 to 5 months of chasing down a concept that ultimately was doomed to failure.
Mm.
Why? We were thinking in terms of logic. And this is where I give my partner in business, life, and crime, Dana Zillick, huge kudos, because when we were stuck on what that particular day, it really for us was we got to wipe the slate clean and we got to go back and look at this with fresh eyes, even though we're suffering our own curse of knowledge. And yes, you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. But as we were almost like songwriters that day, debating over ideas. And then Dana came up with this concept. So she had the initial concept, and conceptually, the idea of the open book with the stardust exploding out of the book, and then different icons to represent all 12 chapters. That was then taken to an illustrator out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, incidentally. And so the original design was created that way, but it only happened to illustrate and underscore the point when we started as well to figure out a way to speak in a more metaphorical, symbolic language. So what we're saying with the book cover, if you want me to peel back the onion even more and pull the curtain back, we're saying that there is magic involved in this without ever using the word magic.
Yeah. It's just a gorgeous way to frame it. And I think it's made its way even into my own home. Good time to mention to people that once upon a time, you called me on the phone. We thought we were chasing one rabbit and we ended up chasing another one together. And you were, my friend, were the one that gave me the moniker America's podcasting coach. And I got to tell you, it's taken everything in me not to write your name on my Twitter bio and say coined by the most tech, Canada's tech speaker of the year. And you advised me not to give you the credit. But I think there's a larger point for people. Highly uncomfortable and unsafe for me to say, I see myself as America's podcasting coach. What can people learn
Right.
from that?
Well, that's that goes so fundamental to the level of discomfort that people will feel even with their own story. And what we've learned over the years, Joe, and this is just a universal condition, maybe it comes from imposter syndrome. I'm not going to overanalyze or theorize as to why it happens, but no one, and I mean no one, it seems, appreciates their own story, respects their own story. No one seems to think the story itself has any value. And that's just, I personally, I've seen that movie hundreds of times. But the truth is, you are America's podcasting coach, because I had never met anyone that studied and really learned. And I'm talking about the intricacies. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the word right, but the intricacies
You're from
of
Canada. Anything goes.
of podcasting. Like, to me, you're like, here, see if I can role play it a little bit. You're like the defensive coordinator with the headsets on, and you know all the plays going into the game. And you've
Try.
scripted everything out in terms of zone blitz and coverages and Tampa 2. And you know all that language inside the tiny world, very defined world of podcasting. And so, but people, like I say, are very, very quick to dismiss their own story, and they don't think it really has value until someone from the it's like I said earlier, you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle, but when someone from the outside helps you see it, then it forces you to make a decision, which is, am I going to step into my own story? Do I have the guts to do that? And right, Joe, and that's chapter 2 of the book, which is the story of the guy from the worst category in the world. I mean, we might want to share that one a little bit, because it was, when I met Jim, he had 5 employees. He was doing about $1.2 million, $1.3 million a year, interchangeable product, and very competitive market. He blended in like everybody else. He too had quote unquote quality products and services. And so I met him in September of 2002. And I think you already know a little bit about that story, but it wasn't until September of 2006, 4 years went by before we discovered the story. 4 years, which back then, is like, that's 18 years of internet world, if you know what I mean, today, because the world is moving so much faster today. But through the telling of one story, starting with one radio ad, everything shifted. Like, we can pinpoint the day, just like the Mona Lisa, just like every story captured and researched in Big Little Legends, we can pinpoint the day. And when Jim Gilbert became Canada's huggable car dealer, his world was never the same.
That term, though, it's every bit as uncomfortable to hear America's podcasting coach coming out of my mouth, telling my story.
Right.
I have to believe Jim had the same exact thought, maybe more, because, I don't need to hug you. I'm trying to sell a car. How do we
Right.
decide on huggable?
Well, huggable, that's an interesting story. And it always goes back to core values. He was already a nice guy. He was quiet. He was almost painfully shy. In fact, him and his wife, Donna, if they were characters in Seinfeld, they would have been classified as low talkers. And so, as people, they never fit the stereotype of the used car dealership market. Used car dealerships, you ask, you throw that out there to any audience, what do you think of used car dealers? And the perceptions are not very favorable. But Jim and Donna, like I said, they never fit that stereotype. In fact, years before we even met, they used to do handmade, handwritten birthday notes to their customers. I mean, they would do all kinds of things to follow up with the phone calls and just be very, very good people and support the local kids' soccer teams and hockey teams and baseball teams, but quietly. And so, but I'll never forget that first day walking into that little dealership on the corner lot. But it was impeccable. The floors were so clean you could eat off them. He was surrounded by what he calls now motivational literature. He was a big believer in Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and some of the other thought leaders of the day. He was always looking for ways to be better, to move his enterprise forward. And as of 2020, after he became the huggable car dealer, we saw the car count. So this happened in 2006 when the radio ads hit, and the car count just started to multiply, Joe. It went from 20 cars a month to 40, and then 60, and then 80. I'll never forget getting the phone calls. April of 2008, 127 cars went through there. And the next year, I think it was 144 went through in 1 month. I mean, he became the largest independent used car dealer in all 4 Atlantic Canadian provinces by 2020. 38 employees, doing north of 50 million in revenue. It's one of Canada's greatest small business success stories. It's the origin story of Big Little Legends. It's where we tested so many of the theories in the book. And what better marketplace can you, as a lab, to study how story can impact human buying behavior, than a used car lot in Fredericton, New Brunswick, that now sits on something like 17 acres of fabulous. And oh, by the way, the Huggable brand was extended in 2018 when they became a Kawasaki dealer. They got into power sports and recreational vehicles. And as of this recording, out of 160 Kawasaki dealerships in Canada, he is the number one Kawasaki dealer in the country.
And if I gave you truth serum and said you have to tell me why, draw me a line between that day, pre-Huggable and post-Huggable, help people understand why it went nuclear.
We didn't change the products. We didn't change the pricing. We changed the plot. We changed the story. We ran 30-second spots and never talked about cars.
You just said, come hug Jim?
Well, we did. Oh, well, here we did. Let me do some improv for you here. I haven't. I'm a little rusty, but you'll get the. He's been called the Casanova of customer focus, the Romeo of roadsters. By golly, some think he's the McDreamy of drive. Stop by at Jim Gilbert's and get your daily dose of Hugtonium, designed to improve your love affair with your car and your libido.
The copy written by?
Well, we'll get into we explain that in the book. But my point is that you think of what we call the category language in that industry, and he's got 22 competitors within a 100-kilometer radius. And what are they all doing? They still are doing the same thing. Better quality, better selection, better service, better value, better prices, usually with a high-octane male testosterone-driven voice talking about 0.9% financing on all makes and models.
I get it, but what I can see someone listening saying, a little corny, a little bit, a little, I don't know, right?
Sure.
Now,
Sure.
when you hear that, do you understand where they're coming from?
Oh, absolutely. But here's what I will come back with. It works because that is who Jim already was. He's already Walt Disney and a little bit of Santa Claus already. But what Huggable did, it gave the brand an anchor. And it wasn't just the story, it was how are we going to tell the story? It wasn't just in the marketing and the radio ads. In fact, it was Jim's wife, Donna, who said, we can't just talk about it. We have to be that thing. And so it started with dozens of teddy bears and then hundreds of teddy bears. Every year, the teddy bear budget, Joe, is like $20,000 of teddy bears.
Unbelievable.
And then there's the mascots and the merry-go-rounds and the 2-kilometer nature trail to go walk your dog. I could go on, but if Walt Disney was to imagine a used car lot, what it would look like, this is the closest facsimile in Fredericton, New Brunswick. There'd be nothing else like it in the world. It's a pure original. And so for what, 15 plus years now, we've been very consistent with building the Huggable brand, and especially through the power of storytelling. So when we ran a spot, I just pulled it out here. Try this one. The puffy shirt, Festivus, shrinkage, the soup Nazi, the low talker, the close talker, the sidler. What is it about the expressions from a show about nothing that inspires Jim Gilbert and his car crazy compadres to create this ad about nothing? If these pretzels are making you thirsty, follow all their Seinfeldian fun on Facebook with their sponge-worthy stories, this ad about nothing.
Unbelievable.
Brought to you by Canada's Huggable car dealer. And so with those 4 words, Joe, as a base, as an anchor, we can tell all kinds of stories related to their own values. And I can share with everyone listening today, what are their values? Family, caring, kindness, originality. Man. Great. We take those values and translate it into what we explain this in the book, translate the values into what we call a tribal narrative. In other words, a 2 to 6 word defining statement that illustrates exactly who you are beyond the products and services you sell. It really worked well for Nike. A 3-word tribal narrative that's never changed since 1988. 3 words, Joe.
Just do it.
Right. And I think when you have that anchor, that base of a story, and that's what a tribal narrative is, it's a story that has no ending. And it's the launching pad for potentially an infinite amount of stories. And that's how you pin the tail on every marketing donkey going out the door and build equity in the marketplace, because you become known for that 2 to 6 word phrase. And so we might have been doing a lot of experimentation with the huggable car dealer. What makes me proud about the book is that it takes all of the experimentation and carefully details in 12 chapters, one for every month, how this actually plays out in so many different areas of human endeavor. So it doesn't matter whether it's B2B, B2C, it doesn't matter whether it's a municipality, a famous painting. This can be universally applied to anyone. Again, as long as there's a leader with courage, initiative, and vision, then there's potential for greatness here.
Big Little Legends, How Everyday Leaders Build Irresistible Brands. If you haven't picked it up already, you're making a huge mistake. One of the best values going as a book, and talk about how the value exceeds when it's a beautiful book like this, cover to cover. So much to unpack here as we begin the second half of the conversation. I want to pull some value for listeners. When you called me on the phone, we talked about a number of things, and I'll never forget. You said, "Damn good conversations, Joe. If I get 10 ideas a week, when I tell you 9 of them are just flat out losers." He may have used a different word. This has got something here.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, down not too far down the road, you mentioned the alarm clock test. I think that's
Yes.
super valuable for people to hear as they hear about what they'll get in the book, but also what they get with you.
Yeah. And actually, I got to give credit to a guy by the name of Clay Abear. So I don't know if Clay is ever going to watch this or know this, but I do want everyone to know. I always, as a good reporter, by the way, I'm a recovering broadcast journalist and I make every effort to credit my sources. But in this case, it was Clay. And Clay was the friend of mine who came to an industry conference I was doing in San Diego. It was at Torrey Pines, actually, the golf course where Tiger Woods had that heroic comeback on one leg in 2008. And so Clay sat in the back of the room to evaluate my presentation. And he talked about how I had many great stories, but no overarching theme that connected it all. And one of the things he mentioned, Joe, was the alarm clock test. And I did the same thing that you did, which is, what? What are you talking about? Because at the time, I thought, and anyone can go to my YouTube channel. I mean, this is what's great about the world, right? This is how transparent it is. And you could go back to my YouTube channel and you would see for several years, I honestly thought I could build a brand around reinvention. That's what I thought. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting the kind of traction that I thought this subject and this overarching principle had. Because, I think reinvention is a great thing. But then Clay comes in, explains the alarm clock test, and I go, what? He says, when people wake up in the morning at a very primal level, they want certain things. They want to be buff with their bodies. They want to be full of energy. They want to feel hopeful. They're looking for, that's what, when the human wakes up in the morning, first thing waking up in the morning, reinvention. That sounds like hard work. That sounds like change. Now, change and reinvention might be necessary, but they're not aspirational when the alarm clock rings at 6:59 a.m. when you've got the whole day to look forward to. Oh, but if you switch it and say instead your key word is something like Legends or Irresistible. Yeah, I would love to be irresistible. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm fascinated by Legends. Maybe I'd like to become one. These are the things that, and again, this is at a very deep subconscious level, but it does explain the primal element so necessary to create something. And this is what I don't think a lot of leaders are fully aware of, is how much thinking goes into creating the core of what this brand is supposed to be and whether it checks a number of significant boxes that are not related to marketing bureaucracy. Okay, the marketing bureaucrats love things like target demographics and reach and frequency. And wait a second, how's this going to resonate with the human at 6:59 a.m.
Hmm. The
when
alarm
they're
clock.
still in their pajamas and they haven't even had their first cup of coffee?
The alarm clock test. Well, we will credit Clay for that. He, I know his work, and that's quite beautiful. You passed that on to me. Another Gairism, if you will, that you passed on to me was the quiz about the purpose of a business. I don't know if that's proprietary information, but that's Theodore Levitt. And you stumped me on that one. I passed it on to my wife. You stumped her. We're both pretty successful people. We had no idea what the purpose of a business is. Roll that story out however you see fit.
Yeah, the purpose of a business was for me always a guiding force ever since I made the shift from, I had 20 years of broadcast journalism. I was inside the bubble. I was inside a radio booth, a television studio. I really didn't know the world of business until my late 30s. And when I got into the world of business consulting, I became a sponge trying to read everything I could to become self taught. So I'm into that 100 business books a year routine, just frantically, voraciously consuming as much as I could. And I was very fortunate to stumble on a couple of key resources. Number one was a book called The E Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, which is the only book I've ever offered the money back guarantee on. And number two, I came across an essay called Marketing Myopia by the aforementioned Theodore Levitt from Harvard. It was written in 1960. And Levitt predicts in 1960 the end of Sears and Blockbuster and Kodak long before it happens with his simple viewpoint and perspective on the purpose of a business. And this is why I love studying legends and history, because I think the real gift of history, Joe, the farther back you look and study, the farther ahead you can see. And in his essay, Marketing Myopia, and anyone can find it on the internet, Levitt argued he was using the railroads at the turn of the last century as the classic example. And he points to the railroads as having all of the customer traffic. They have all the consumer traffic. They have all the freight traffic. They are the way things and people get from point A to point B right across North America. They own it all. All the market share belongs to them. And so in terms of transportation, and what Levitt was arguing was that the railroads erosion of popularity because of airlines was nobody's fault except the railroads themselves. And here's why. In 1903, a couple of brothers from Dayton, Ohio, go to Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, and I think they proved over just over a minute long that yes, man could fly. Yes. Now, what would have stopped any of the rail companies from purchasing the new technology that Orville and Wilbur had developed? Nothing. They had all the money. They had rich reserves, cash. And so, but they didn't. And the Wright brothers worked and worked and worked on the technology. They didn't even monetize their innovation until 1908 when the US Army made the first purchase. And so consequently, nothing would have stopped any of the railroads, the Santa Fe, all the Union Pacific, whatever they were back then, from saying, hey, how about we give you $100,000 or whatever the number would be, and we'll buy the technology. You guys keep building it, And before too long, we'll have Union Pacific Airways or Santa Fe Airways. And the reason, the fundamental reason, is that the railway companies thought they were in the rail business. They didn't realize they were in the transportation business. Only years later did they invent the word paradigm shift. But it was massive. The same thing happened to Kodak. They thought they were in the film business. They were really in the memory business. And when film, the technology was replaced by digital. Oh, by the way, who invented digital? Oh, yeah, a guy from Kodak. Yeah. I could go on, but you see the point. Same thing happened to Blockbuster. They thought they were in the video rental business. They were really in the entertainment business, especially the home entertainment business, where people don't want to leave their living rooms. And so, Purpose of a Business by Levitt, people think, well, it's to make money, and well, no, profit is a result of fulfilling the purpose. And that's the key thing, because it could just as easily be, what's the opposite of profit? Loss. Well, those are two forms of measurement. Once you see money is just the result of how a business fulfills its purpose, then you understand what Apple, Amazon, and all of the big players of today have done, which is fulfill Levitt's prophecy going back to 1960. The real purpose of a business is to create and then keep a customer. The more you create and keep the customer, the more profitable you become over time. It's that simple.
To create and keep a customer.
Right. And with the internet, so further, I mean, this is a fun example using this podcast. Why don't we use this podcast? Because now with the internet and the social media platforms available to us, now Levitt's very definition can be expanded to the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer who brings in other customers. Why? Because if one person organically shares this podcast without any influence from you or I, without any prompting, you know what I mean, Joe? Just
Organic, yeah, willing
organic,
accomplices.
right out of the goodness of their heart, because they really enjoyed this damn good conversation and they really like what Joe Ferraro's doing, then that just might create a future client for America's podcasting coach. That's what we never had up until these social media platforms, the ability for the customer to create more customers and more fans.
You call it in the book, people will be willing accomplices in your story.
Yes.
Powerful marketing done by hand to hand, digital thumb to digital thumb. It's beautiful stuff. Gair, what's the unspoken promise you make to readers if they buy this book?
No one's ever asked that one. I love the questions you ask because, well, this is why you're the coach. Because the unspoken promise.
Because someone's going to hand you their money and they're going to hand you their trust. And, the book may go on the shelf. It may.
Yeah, I think if my knee-jerk response is something we came up with at the very, very late stages when our publisher, by the way, they're wonderful. They're Page 2 out of Vancouver, British Columbia. They specialize in the nonfiction space. And it was a phrase that we kind of all came together on after the manuscript had already been finished. We were working on the dust jacket. And I think that's the unspoken promise, which is without magic, it's just marketing. And so the unspoken promise is this, is that magic requires a beginner's mindset to look at things through the eyes of a child, that no matter how experienced you may be, whatever your marketing background may be, or how things were done, if you approach this with a beginner's mindset, hey, who knows? Maybe something magical will happen. And I've seen that. I've been so lucky, Joe, because I've seen that happen in so many different industries where the results border on becoming somewhat magical. So Jim Gilbert, for example, became metaphorically the Apple, the Ferrari, the Nike, the Disney of his category. He's king, queen, and country in that domain called used car lots in Eastern Canada. But that's what's also happening in a small town like Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, or with a gal out west in Western Canada with Hilberg and Burke. She's done not one, but two pieces of jewelry for Queen Elizabeth II. And once that story hit that she had done customized pieces for Her Majesty the Queen, what do you think happened to the Hilberg and Burke brand, Joe? It just exploded because was the jewelry good? Yes. No
It
one's
was tasty.
arguing that the sapphires weren't, and the settings and the cut and the diamonds, they were all great, right? But as soon as the world's, you know, longest reigning monarch is in possession and those pictures are all over the web, now it's a big deal.
You teed me up nicely for a great place to close with a little mini case study that ties all the things you just said together. Last night, doing a little bit of reading with the children before bed, and something came up where I said to my son, "How to Have Better Conversations" would be a beautiful book title. And he said, "Well, it's not as exciting as Harry Potter." And something struck me in preparing for our conversation about that, right? He's sitting there in
Right.
the world of his 11-year-old brain. He goes, "You don't like fantasy genre?" I said, "Not really." And but but if I can get, and this is how I know I'm still on a journey, if I can borrow some of the magic, and if people listening can
Yes.
borrow some of the narrative from J.K. Rowling and put it into conversations, then we're no longer selling how to have a better conversation. We're selling being 3 inches taller when we walk into a room.
Right.
We're selling things that are beyond the literal.
In fact, you just, and maybe this will help you towards your close. It speaks to creating something larger than life. And when you do create something larger than life, we as humans are naturally attracted to it. I was speaking in Balmoral, in Edinburgh, Scotland. Okay, speaking in Edinburgh, Scotland, there was about 400 or so business executives. It was the Hotel Balmoral or the Balmoral Hotel, whatever it was, the name. And I had no idea that that is the hotel, and there's one specific suite where J.K. Rowling goes to work on writing her novels, part of that Harry Potter series. Now, I'm no Harry Potter fan, I'll freely admit, but do I acknowledge her genius? And has she created a larger than life brand? Absolutely. So, Joe, what do you think is the most requested room at the Balmoral Hotel for people who want to book time, vacation, or business trips? Which room has the highest demand? Which suite is it, do you think?
It's the room where you hope to get some of that fairy dust from J.K. Rowling's pen.
And I don't recall the exact number, but it's somewhere around whatever the normal room charge is to get the J.K. Rowling Harry Potter suite. It's like 3x, 4x, 5x, whatever that number is. So it's not just demand that escalates. The Mona Lisa effect and the magic of Big Little Legends, it's not just demand, it's also driving up value.
It's a beautiful place to close. As I promised, we could talk for a long time, and I love putting up some guardrails for people. Gair, where's your best advice for people to find the book? Is it agnostic and get wherever you can, or is there a place where that you want them to get your hands on it?
Well, I would love if people just went to the website, and it's www.gairmaxwell.com, but also there's an actual book site, biglittlelegends.com. Yes, it's going to be all over the internet. You'll find it with Amazon and other great retailers, et cetera, et cetera. But we also enjoy, Joe, um, connecting with people in terms of community. And so when you go to the website and you go to the book page, that's your entry point into our YouTube channel. We do publishing every second Wednesday. We run a new series, and about 95% of the pieces are all on video. It's called Leaders and Legends. We're always exploring how leaders today are creating modern day legacy, and we're using lessons from the past to predict the future, et cetera, et cetera. And I always say we give away some of our best stuff for free, and they're all right there. So, yeah, GairMaxwell.com, BigLittleLegends.com, and you'll find more than enough to keep you fascinated and intrigued about how you can, advance this for your own enterprise.
Beautiful. What are my chances of getting a signed copy in person someday as we share a meal?
Well, that's what we're hoping for. And that's the fascinating thing, is that people don't know this, but you and I have never met in person.
No.
But it's only through the magic of these great platforms. And I know people like to complain about social media, this and that, but wait a second. Without this technology, where would we be today? How would we have survived the pandemic without some of the gifts of this technology that still has allowed many businesses and individuals to keep moving forward? So I think that that you just took a page right out of my playbook. Is we're slowly starting to get back to traveling again. So the good Lord willing, we'll be there before too long, and we'll have you know how do I say this, Joe? We'll have lots of cognac to go around, and maybe even some Jack Daniels whiskey. How's that?
Nothing,
Because
nothing better to blend the two. Gary, it is a pleasure, my friend. I hope this was damn good for you. It certainly was for me and for the listeners. And I think that I'd be remiss to not say thank you for all that you've done for me behind the scenes. Only gave people a little bit of a glimpse into all the perspective and and to use your words, the years that you tried to save me of anguish in building my business. Thank you, my friend.
well, my pleasure, Joe, and right back at you. And always looking forward to another one of these damn good conversations.